Welcome, everyone, to the Firing the Man podcast. On today's episode, we are joined by Francois Jaffres from Noviland. Now, Ken, after this episode, I am realizing that Francois is a black belt in product sourcing, and I am a white belt and have a lot to learn. And there's a ton of value in us partnering with Noviland in order to just do a better job here. What are you thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. After talking with Francois, he's an expert in not only he's an expert in supply chain management from A to Z. And Noviland, after talking with them, they're kind of a turnkey service doing, sourcing, inspections, logistics, and, they're integrated in with Amazon and shipping in it. Yeah, it was just, it was pretty amazing. And, starting as as a solopreneur, David, you and I, it's like we wear lots of hats and do all these things, and to get some of those off our plate is just absolutely amazing. So to partner, with experts at Noviland, I'm definitely looking forward to it. And, Francois, he unleashes a wealth of knowledge on this podcast on anything from sourcing to, his thoughts on tariffs and China. And yeah, it was pretty amazing. What was the key takeaway, David?
I would say in general, if someone asked me for one bit of advice when getting into e-commerce, I generally say like sell good products, and unless you're manufacturing those products yourself, you need to have a really solid relationship with the manufacturer, and they have a network of 3,000 factories that they're working with. Oftentimes, they're going to get better pricing than you can get on your own because of that relationship. And so I would say to the listeners, if you've ever gotten on Alibaba, sent out a bunch of messages, and just been frustrated with the overall product sourcing process, this is an episode you're not going to want to miss. Francois, welcome to the show. First things first, tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey to being part of Noviland.
Yeah, well, thank you, David and Ken, for having me. I really do appreciate it. Wonderful show you guys have. Lisa raves about it all the time. So thank you guys for having me. It's truly an honor. My background, I'm from the Washington, D.C. area. Always kind of been an entrepreneur at heart, I guess I should say. I kind of always have my focuses in a bunch of places, but as a kid, I went around to all the apartment complexes, you toss out trash, and would take candy to school and resell it from Costco. And so I always have that kind of buy and resell, almost arbitrage mindset. So that's why I love, first of all, working with Amazon sellers and e-commerce sellers and just entrepreneurs in general. So that makes my role here very exciting. But my journey with Noviland, I started back in 2016. I was finishing up my industrial engineering degree at West Virginia University. So I was able to come with a little bit of supply chain and manufacturing knowledge and background. A really key emphasis was on processes and improving process and building SOPs, which is quite literally all supply chain is, managing each step of the way. And so when I started back in 2016, I think it was through Barefoot Student or barefoot.com or something like that, where I was just looking for an internship for a summer. And I stumbled upon, we weren't Noviland at the time, we were actually Eurekian. And the name sounded funny to me. I was like, I know that company. And I was like, it can't be a startup. I looked it up, and Eurekia is a vacuum brand, actually. So hence the name change, the eventual name change. But yeah, it started with them, and they really pitched this vision of streamlining through technology and through the internet, streamlining a lot of this international manufacturing and purchasing process. And that's mainly because our founder, Chuan, has a background where his family owns manufacturers in China, and he would sort of work as an intermediary between them and US companies that wanted to use them. And they would have listings on Alibaba, as well as a few other marketplace and platforms for manufacturers. So he saw this tremendous need where all these platforms are really just sort of an open platform, and a lot of times it's what we see as a growing pay-to-play marketplace where you have verified gold suppliers all is fantastic, and that is talked about in every single sourcing YouTube video that I see. Always look for the verified gold badge and make sure that you look at the ratings and the number of transactions. But in reality, in practicality, that seems wonderful. On paper, that seems wonderful. In reality, that is not necessarily the truth, right? So where most of them, I'm sure most of them are actual verified gold suppliers by a third-party auditor that they have no relations with. I'm sure that is the case, but there are still cases where, and we've heard this many times, where they would have an inspector come and they may pay them under the table, or they may just know them, or they may, there's this one crazy story where they actually invited them, the inspector invited the manufacturer to their wedding, and the manufacturer, instead of giving them a direct payment, they gave them a very big gift. So it's a lot of these sort of international risks are presented with sourcing from overseas. And so our founders really thought, hey, we can make this safer, we can make this simpler through a centralized platform that covers the entire end-to-end sourcing and manufacturing and logistics processes. While at the same time delivering a white glove service that no one else is doing at the moment. You go on Alibaba, you'll talk to 10 different people. 5 of those might be from the same company, or they might be trade agents representing factories, but saying, oh yeah, we are a manufacturing cooperative of sorts, right? So there's a lot of things that go into the background that isn't necessarily small business friendly. And when we started in 2016, I was personally doing hundreds of calls a day, trying to find a good product market fit, trying to see how, where do we actually fit into this equation? So like a traditional sourcing agency, we're targeting more enterprise and medium to large size businesses to try to get into their supply chain in general, the procurement teams. And over the course of 2 years, we saw that, we do very well in building materials, we do very well in consumer packaged goods. And in 2018, we launched our platform. And it was not the nicest looking platform, but it was a platform nonetheless. And it was something that was, to me and to our team and to a lot of our initial early adopters, revolutionary. It's something first to market of its kind. There's marketplaces, like I said, that have been around far before us, like Alibaba. But we're the true first to market with a platform that does all the capabilities that our platform does. There's no one else that does that in regards to controlling the RFQs, the sourcing, the back end tasks and process sort of development and project development between our teams. And so with that also came, of course, the rise of e-commerce sellers on our platform itself. Because Amazon sellers naturally wanted to find new manufacturers, new suppliers, and they Googled us and somehow stumbled upon us. It was not actually one of our target markets. And since then, I guess to sort of shorten the story, because this go very long, but to shorten the story, we saw that there's a ton of features that e-commerce sellers specifically love and they need to mitigate those risks and to make it simpler. So our goal is really to simplify this overseas purchasing and procurement process, not for just medium to large size businesses, but for everyone, for a new Amazon seller, for a marketing department at your local retail chain that just wants to buy 1,000 mugs with their logo on it, and do so with a very competitive cost. So the pricing that you'll see on our platform is usually on par, if not a little bit less of what you can get yourself, unless you have pre-established relationships with suppliers. That's a different story though. While at the same time giving them the QC, overseeing the production, acting as the boots on the ground, helping them develop those RFQs to set them up for sourcing success. And then taking care of logistics, Amazon FBA packaging, which is a pain in the ass. You have to make sure that everything is labeled properly, the master cartons are under 50 pounds, and even you get to 47, you're kind of pushing it. So we make sure all these different specs are met properly, and we do that at the source. So you don't have to ship it to an FBA location and wonder, hey, am I going to be charged FBA fees, or ship it to a 3PL location and worry about them having to prep it for FBA. We could ship it directly in for you. So that was sort of my journey. I started as just an intern, moved on to sort of a sales position, ultimately settled with business development, which is a very vague term, but it is sort of all encapsulating of marketing, sales, partnership establishment, um, customer experience. So wearing a lot of hats, still very young, but it is exciting nonetheless. No day is the same as the one before, and it's something that I was definitely trying to avoid going into a sort of a first job out of college sort of thing. So luckily, I have great bosses that empower me to sort of use a lot of, I guess, entrepreneurial skills is a good way to put it. And we always find new markets and new ways to expand, which is exciting. But that, I hope that answered your question for how I got started with Noviland.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, to sum that up, Noviland sounds like a turnkey sourcing solution platform. When you start working with, let's just, for example, an Amazon FBA centric seller, right? Like, say they come to Noviland and sign up and kind of go through the process. What have you seen that some of the traditional Amazon FBA centric sellers are? What are some of the mistakes that they're making that whenever they come on board, you're like, oh, right away, is it cost? Is it quality? What have you seen?
Well, for starters, the biggest cliche I think that I hear most commonly throughout every seller and anyone that's not necessarily familiar with business is I want the best quality at the best price. And what does that mean? What on earth does that mean? Like, do you want to pay $5? Do you want to pay $20? Because you could pay the same amount, or you would pay different amounts for different quality levels, right? So, for starters, it is, I think, lack of experience. That's where that ties into. Second, I think it's lack of capital. I think that is a big issue because it seems like there's a lot of false information out there that says, hey, you can get started selling on Amazon with less than $1,000. And yes, realistically, if you sold arbitrage, you could do that. You go to your local Walmart, find clearance items, post them on Amazon, try to sell them. Very much doable. I have a few friends that did it in the past. They were fairly successful, made some vacation money. But when you're talking about private labeling and you're talking about building your own brand and building your own products, you need a capital at a very minimum to be relatively successful. Just for sourcing and logistics, I would say anywhere between $5,000 and $10,000, and that is at a bare minimum, right? That is to order your initial inventory. That's not including tooling or molding if you had a custom product. That's not including marketing expenses. And I know a lot of sellers that have used our platform with far less. They've started with $3,000, $4,000, and they grew, exponentially. They started to place $10,000 orders and $20,000 orders, getting up to container loads. So it's not to, decentivize anyone that has less money, but if you want to be safe and you want to be able to run the proper giveaways and to iterate on product design and to work with a lot of factories instead of just, being a one-trick pony, I would say $5,000 to $10,000 at a minimum is what you need for sourcing. Aside from that, I guess two more things. Speed. I see a lot of sellers that, see this and they have the wrong expectations of, okay, we can finish this up in 2 weeks and I'll get my product within Amazon within a month. That's not realistic if you're developing your own product and having that manufactured. But there's also the counter argument to speed. There's a lot of sellers that will develop a product over the course of a year, and in that year they have 10 competitors, so it's no longer even feasible to sell. And the last thing really is grit. I would say grit is a huge component, not only with Amazon, but I'm sure you guys can attest, it's a huge component to e-commerce. Right, you have to put in the work to learn about those platforms, to learn about the advertising, the marketing, but also grit on the sourcing side. But the grit aspect really is understanding your product, making sure that you are an expert in what you're going to sell, and that way you can also talk to the factory as an expert. And I think that's something we can touch on a little bit more. But yeah, those four main things: capital, experience, speed, and grit. Are four very challenging aspects, I think, for a lot of new sellers.
I'm glad that you made that comment on capital because I think some of these YouTube gurus do the industry a disservice by saying, "Yeah, get started with $500 or $1,000," and traditionally it's hard to get a factory to take you seriously on that small of an order, right? And so now one thing I want to ask you, and this is a little embarrassing for me to admit. So I've been in business for 4 years, and in terms of sourcing, I've sourced from existing relationships in the US. That has probably been my most successful products. And then exclusively Alibaba. And I will say my experiences with Alibaba have been like spray and pray, right? So I will have like a canned message with some images and examples, and I will send it out to 20 different factories. And then some of them get back to me same day. Some of them it takes several weeks. I'm actually right in the middle of this spray and pray strategy, where I started this about 9 months ago, and I got my first sample this week. And so I learned about Noviland about 2 weeks ago, and I signed up for an account and am just getting started there. So what would you say will be different? How will my experience be different with Noviland as opposed to interfacing with Alibaba?
Well, for starters, with Noviland, you get rid of that spray and pray model. The reason that you sort of have that spray and pray mindset is because it is an open marketplace where any supplier can sign up. It could be a trade agent, could be a scam artist, it could be a factory, could be a factory representative that's now a trade agent or an actual employee of the factory. They might just be helping them out to get them online. But with that also comes the preparation, right? Preparing your RFQ, and that's something else that we'll touch on, I think, a little bit later. But going back to what I initially said, it's very much a white glove service where as soon as you submit an RFQ on Noviland, we will assess it and we'll make sure to give you feedback on anything that we know the factories in our network are going to need to quote this accurately. So on Alibaba, you might spray and pray and you'll get out of those 20, let's say you'll get 10 responses. And now everyone is sending you different pricing. The specs are likely a little bit different for all of them. They might be misquoting you and just saying, oh yeah, I saw that you included that in your specs, but I didn't include that in my pricing. So now you might start seeing incremental increases like, oh, the packaging, or I mentioned the card insert initially, but you didn't quote that. So now that's an extra 10 cents. Oh, I didn't realize you wanted polypropylene. This was actually quoted ABS. That's an extra 15 cents. And so it's sort of this incremental process, and you feel like you're getting a lot out of it because it's a lot of one-on-one interactions, when in reality, it just delays your speed. So with Noviland, as soon as you submit it, we assess it. As soon as we deem it as a sort of a quality RFQ or a request for quote, we'll send it off to a few of the factories in our network, usually about 10 to 15, sometimes up to 20. Now we won't send any design files, so we don't, try to limit the exposure of your IP as much as possible, while also having agreements in place with all of our factory networks, all of the factories in our network, to make sure that they don't use your information for anything else, whether that's develop their own products or send it off to their trade agents, whatever the case may be. From there, we look at the manufacturers and we have all this data behind supporting this, showing, okay, what are their capabilities? What is their speed in regards to how fast they can manufacture it? Have they manufactured this in the past? Do they have experience with these materials? Do they have the certifications that you need? Are those certifications legitimate? Because that's another issue that no one really talks about. A lot of certifications tend to be tossed around, and they might just change the name on it. And they'll Photoshop it, looks legit. You place an order, find out later that it's not, because in reality, those certifications aren't always checked by customs, but they're sort of this supplementary information. If customs checks for it, or if the FDA checks for it, they will have to present them, and then they review them. And so we know all this information on the factories, we know what they're good at, and so from there we can get you the most accurate pricing ahead, like on that first try. We know everything that you need down to, okay, you just want a very cheap packaging, let's say a clear polypropylene bag with your logo on a sticker and the FNSKU label. We'll include all of that in that initial quote. So where it might take you 4 or 5 weeks to develop with a factory, all the incremental changes, making sure that all the specs are right. We'll get that done typically in about 3 to 5 days. Now, sometimes it takes a little bit longer because there is missing information, but our product specialist team actually works with you for that. So another difference between us and Alibaba is that on Alibaba, you have no idea who you're working with on the other side of the screen. With Noviland, you work with only a Noviland team. And this is how we kind of grew our business model, actually. So rather than having one agent that's worried about the packaging, that's worried about the product specs, worried about the HS code, shipping, quotes, all of that information, we have a team. You have a product specialist. They double as a factory specialist also, so they interact between you and the factory. They can negotiate the best pricing. They can make sure that when the factory says, yes, I can do something, they say, yes, I can do something, and that's going to cost an extra 10 cents, not last minute increases. It's also going to be, yes, I can do that, and I can actually do that because I'm experienced, not necessarily just, yes, I can do that. And then they try to do it. You end up with, I don't know if you can curse on this, but as sort of poor quality or shit quality, I guess you could say.
Right.
Which happens a lot. And then you can consolidate all of your samples directly in the platform. You'll interact with order managers, quality control inspectors, all Noviland employees, and everyone in one place. Plus, another piece of technology in this tool is absolutely awesome. No one else has this. You get a quote and you add it to a cart, similar to e-commerce. Add it to a cart, enter in any FBA destination. Let's say you usually get it on the West Coast. Sometimes you get it, let's say in New Jersey and in North Carolina. Add in all these different FBA locations, and instantly you will see the customs and import duties, and you will see the shipping information. So the shipping costs. So you know your landed cost. And you could play around with the different products per order. You can play around with the quantities. So let's say you just started out with 500 units. You're like, I know I could scale this up to 2,000 within 3 months. Increase that number to 2,000, you'll immediately see, okay, this goes from utilizing 5% of a container to 20% of a container. And with that comes the unit cost decreases, right? Because of shipping, you're usually paying for that initial cubic meter, and then you're paying for additional space after that. So you have a true cost value there. That helps you very quickly say also, this is doable. I can run, I could break even on my first few orders, but once I get to 2,000, I have a 20% profit margin because it's just shipping. So we have that tool. Of course, as soon as you place an order, we oversee the entire production. So it's no more late night WeChats, no more late night emails, late night phone calls to your freight forwarder saying, where the hell is my products? Where's the bill of lading? All of that is tracked directly in the platform too. So our product specialists work with the factories one-on-one. They have weekly check-ins or bi-weekly check-ins sometimes. They perform the QC inspection based on your key quality indicators, not just a guesstimate of what you might like. So where traditionally you would work with a manufacturer, work with a different freight forwarder, work with a different QC inspector, all of that's done in one platform. And it's an all-inclusive price. So the price you see is the price you pay. There's no monthly subscription. There's no last-minute fees. It's all very clear there. You see the FOB pricing, you see the customs and import duties, and you see the shipping costs. That's all you need to get your initial COGS or your cost of goods sold, right? And we'll do all the FBA prep at the source, right? It'll go through our logistics center. If we see that, hey, this packaging is not good enough, we'll repackage it, or we might include some wiring on the outside, or if it's something fragile, we might put some cartons on the outside of it to make sure that it's safe. So it's really working as more of a partnership rather than just a transaction. That's something that I think e-commerce has kind of taken away from business in general. But I guess that's something that a lot of sellers might struggle with, sort of getting out of that consumer mindset and getting into a business mindset.
Absolutely. Now, as a follow-on question, as you describe this process, it seems to me kind of like an all-you-can-eat buffet, right? From start to finish, and I absolutely love that. Now, you had mentioned, optimizing the number of units in a container, and I'm thinking of one particular product that Ken and I are working on now, where we're trying to solve that puzzle. We've already found the supplier. But in terms of, optimizing a container and then getting it over, that's something that we're struggling with. And so, do you offer any like a la carte services in that, we've already got the relationship, but we think we could improve on logistics in terms of getting it over there? Is that something that we could work with you on?
Yeah, so we offer a purely logistics and QC service also. So if you already have the supplier, perfectly fine. We can help you with just the logistics and the import process, making sure all the documentation's in order as well. And also a key thing to note, making sure that the HS code is properly classified. So a lot of businesses come to us with existing suppliers and they show us their HS codes. And when we get it over to our customs team, they say, no way in hell is it, this 3.8%. This is a 28.5% HS code. And if you don't pay that, you're going to be subject to double that if they catch it for misclassifying it. So it's all about, making sure that you are not using black hat tactics. And we try to do that in the most cost efficient way for every business that we work with. But to answer your question, yes, we do handle just the logistics or just the QC or a combination of both. Yeah.
Okay. And one last thing before I kick it over to Ken, for our listeners that are unfamiliar with HS code, can you explain what that is and why it's important?
Yeah. It was probably top of mind for everyone unknowingly about 2 years ago when the trade war started. But when the administration started imposing a lot of tariffs or additional tariffs, supposedly on China. It's not really on China. As you guys know, it is actually on the businesses that import those items. Now, they did that so they could decentivize doing more business with China and try to go to other manufacturing partners that or manufacturing countries that we have partnerships with. But HS codes is the code that, and it's an international code, I believe, but it's a code that the U.S. Customs classifies every single product imaginable, and they have to they put these tariffs or taxes is another word for tariff. They add these taxes onto your import. So let's say your HS code was whatever number and it came with a 3% tariff pre-trade war. Now you might see a 15% increase after that trade war because it was classified within a certain list. So now you might see an 18% tariff or taxes that you have to pay on the import value. And that does not include shipping. That's purely on, I would say, the FOB pricing of that item or even the EXW pricing of that item. That includes your packaging. That includes, it's supposed to include things like design and mold. Not a lot of people classify those on their invoices. But I guess to answer your HS question in short, it's a code that customs classifies every item and they put a taxes or a tariff on that item. That's what you're paying when you're importing it. So that's why you saw, the 25% tariffs, and that was a huge rave. And it's still an issue today. I don't imagine it's going to go away anytime soon. I just don't think they're going to get worse.
Gotcha. Yeah. Now, Francois, the way you explained the entire, the process was very eye-opening to me. And as a solopreneur for the last several years, building an e-commerce business and having sourced and dealt with logistics and inspections and literally every aspect of that. Hearing that process, I'm like, okay, where do I sign up? So and I'm sure some of this, a lot of the solopreneur listeners are in the same boat. So you mentioned an RFQ. So let's I'd like to do a practical experiment here. So for the listeners of the show, David and I, we have rocking chairs in the podcast studio that are pretty popular. So let's say David and I wanted to throw up some Firing the Man merch, and we wanted to source some rocking chairs. We go to Noviland. Can you give us some pointers, some tips on how to fill out this RFQ and kind of go through that process?
Yeah, and so every product is going to be different. And we have an RFQ guideline that tries to help every business sort of point them in the right direction, easily accessible on our website also. And it's downloadable, I think, on our homepage if you just go to noviland.com. But there's a few key elements, right? There's the product information. So we're talking about materials, specifications. For something like that, we definitely need to know the type of wood, the finishing, the paint that you want on it. It's likely going to have a fumigation charge, so that's something to keep in mind for exporting wooden items. Do you want it assembled or unassembled? So a RTA or ready to assemble product. What type of packaging do you want on that? Do you want, if it's fully assembled, do you want it to be within, styrofoam, or they know it in China as EPS, or expanded polystyrene? So if someone doesn't understand what styrofoam is, and I learned this the hard way talking to real factories and real factory owners, so what the hell is styrofoam? I don't know. Well, it's EPS. Most of them will know what styrofoam is, but if they don't, it's EPS. What level of protection do you want? Do you want just a plain cardboard box? Do you want a full color print on it? What sort of labeling do you need on it? How much weight should it support? What sort of rocking mechanism does it need to have? Do you have example URLs to the item? If it's a new invention, do you have AI files or CAD files that you can provide? Shows the dimensions. The engineers at the factories can usually read those files and see, okay, these are the different components to it. They'll create a bill of materials and be able to quote that. If if it was more plastic on the bottom, they might require some molds. Then we'll let you know, hey, we need CAD files for these molds. So for the product aspect, it is materials, specs, colors, finishing, as much detail as you can get on the product itself. And that doesn't mean that you have to do a materials test on it. Just Google 10 different rocking chairs. I'm sure you'll find a commonality between the materials. Looking at the 5-star review items on Amazon, look at what materials they use. Look at what finishing they have. Is it a stain or is it a powder coating? I mean, there's so many different ways to actually have it done. But that level of detail is what we're looking for, because we only work with OEM factories, and they're all medium to large size. So they're fairly well experienced with getting these technical details and producing items, not necessarily saying, hey, I want a rocking chair, and then proposing, these are the 10 different rocking chairs that we have. That's usually the job of a trade agent. And that's where you also present more risk to your supply chain. A lot of businesses don't tend to think of it that way. They think of it as, hey, I can order 200 units instead of having to order 1,000 units. But what happens after they run out of those 200 units? How did they get those 200 units? Can they produce those 200 units again, or is the MOQ going to go up? Did they just tack that onto the back of someone else's order, or is it actually the factory that just overproduced for someone else? So there's all these different elements that we work slightly differently than a traditional sourcing process, but we do it because we need to work with serious businesses that are serious about their business, right? So if you are not willing to put in the work to tell us what exactly you want, then I mean, we're not doing any magic here. We can't take it out of your head. I mean, you have to tell us what you need, but you have to tell us the product, the materials, and another very important aspect that we do ask for, and it's not necessarily immediately, but it has to be established at some point, are key quality indicators. And this goes back to sort of, I want the best quality at the best price. Well, that price is really determined by the quality of that product. So if you said, I want these t-shirts, and I don't care if there's a few loose threads on the end of them, it's going to be cheaper than I want these t-shirts and they have to be completely seamless. And any loose threads need to be cut off. Otherwise, that is a minor defect or minor nonconformity. So we ask for these different key quality indicators, and we have also a list that we've made that's attached to the RFQ guideline or the request for quote guideline that anyone can access if they sign up, and it's directly in the new RFQ section. But that's, I guess, the 3 elements: product, packaging, and quality are all the things that we ask for.
Very nice. Very nice. Now, I want to talk about, we are involved in a global business. Oftentimes, and I hear this from a lot of sellers and masterminds, is the first place that we're thinking is China in terms of manufacturing. And, as I look at my own product portfolio, I like to go to China because typically I can get products, and even after considering sea shipping, can usually get them for 50 to 75 cents on the dollar from what I can get it in the United States. Now, with the tariffs this year, that advantage has shrunken. And so what are you seeing in terms of, globally? What are some other countries that people should be looking at? And do you anticipate China rebounding from this, or because I've seen a lot of people drift away from China after this 25% tax. So what are your thoughts here?
And it's funny that you mentioned that you see a lot of companies drifting away because we saw the same thing actually as soon as the trade war started. A lot of our users asked us, can you find factories in, let's say, Vietnam or in India or in Bangladesh? Every country has their advantages and their disadvantages. A huge advantage of China is that they have such a robust supply chain where everything is centered around manufacturing, and it's centered around a lot of manual processes, but mostly machinery and tooling. And with that comes experience. So there's a lot more engineers, I would say, in China, for starters, because there's more people in China, but also because they're able to produce more items. And with producing more items, they're able to produce more experienced workers. So they can develop better molding, better tooling, usually for cheaper than other countries. But you are absolutely right. The tariffs sort of started to scare companies away. And so when they did ask us, hey, can you go to Vietnam? Can you go to India? And we did look into these countries. They did not have as short of lead times as China. So that impacted their supply chain. They did not have as robust of an infrastructure, logistic-wise. So their logistics costs actually might go up. The quality tended to actually suffer. So if you're usually getting, on average about 4.5 stars, you might drop down to 3.5 stars because you're getting more returns. But a lot of companies that might have even left our platform and tried to go to, let's say, India, we saw them back on 8 months later. It's really the chaos and the panic that the market has presented by things like the 25% tariffs. And I'm not saying that you can't find a cheaper item elsewhere. 100% you can. You do enough digging, flip enough rocks, you 100% can find another factory elsewhere. It's not going to be anywhere near as easy as trying to find a factory in China, for starters. You're going to have to do a lot more vetting. You're going to, I would suggest trying to get boots on the ground, so actually going and visiting those factories. I had someone experience actually, it was a ceramic tile that they were sourcing through China. Great product, had a porcelain glaze on top of it. And they took it to India and they portrayed it as the exact same specs. They even shipped them a sample to the factory to make sure it was the exact same. Factory produced items with completely different materials because they usually produce for the Indian market. And when they received the sample, part of it was already chipping off and sort of crumbling, almost like a grain, which, that took them itself about 4 or 5 months to find a factory and then to figure out that it's not the right factory and that I should just pay the additional 25%. The thing is that the markets are going to sort of even out. Right. As soon as the panic and the chaos goes away, and this is what we're going to see with the UK for the next probably 6 to 8 months. But as soon as that panic and chaos goes away, everyone sort of settles on, okay, now we understand it's 25% more. How can we cut costs elsewhere? Can we spend less on advertising? Can we expand our product lines to actually have 15% margins across 10 products instead of 35% margins on 3 products? Can we save on logistics by having more items within a container? Now, what does that come with? I have to find a 3PL partners. So I guess to go back to the question, the tariffs are something that definitely has impacted the supply chain, and a lot of companies have looked outside of China. Far less companies have been successful looking outside of China than staying in my opinion. Now we have Vietnam, and this is a real example, actually. Cabinetry in China got hit with a 260% anti-dumping and countervailing duty tariff. For those of you that don't know what an AD or a CVA is, that is the US saying, hey, China, you are dumping your products in the market to make US companies and US manufacturers no longer competitive. So they hit them with a 260% anti-dumping duty and tariff. And they immediately started seeing Chinese factories flood Vietnam. And so now you started seeing traditionally furniture manufacturers, not necessarily cabinetry manufacturers, but furniture manufacturers in Vietnam start producing cabinetry. And so we saw poor quality, we saw much longer lead times, we saw sort of black hat tactics with between China and Vietnam, where they were importing pretty much all the products from China, already made, just not finished, into Vietnam, putting them in the box, slapping the Made in Vietnam label, shipping it over to the US, and just having a country of origin certificate for it. That itself can cost a business the entire business. Actually, it can completely bankrupt a business if they're found out to do anything of that sort, even unknowingly, right? Because they just lost their entire supply chain if that's all they banked on. So it was our job to sort of find the right factories that were moving to Vietnam and were setting up shop and creating their own manufacturers and had the right MSDS reports and sourcing their products ethically, or their parts and pieces ethically. And I don't think that's something you can necessarily do alone. I don't think that's necessarily something that any business, no matter the size, new Amazon seller, experienced Amazon seller, Fortune 500 company, can go through alone. And that's what we're here for. We're here to really be more as a partner rather than just another transactional platform that you use to source or to find factories or to see production timelines.
Yeah, that's great. So as a follow-up question to that, Francois, now this is kind of be a hypothetical situation, but drawing on your experience and kind of the situation we're in the world now, the tariffs have put a lot of pressure on small businesses to like say, hey, source somewhere else, right? Mm-hmm. But in my mind, at the end of the day, like what we have in the US or any other country is everything over the last 2 decades or 3 decades all the manufacturing has moved to China largely, right? So I don't think it's feasible to say, I think there's 2 options. I think one, you go the route of, hey, I'm going to figure out how to manufacture this in the US and I'm going to jump through, 37 hoops to do that. Or 2, you source in China and you scale. Now, do you have any other arguments to that, or do you think it's feasible that manufacturing will move in a large scale back to the US, or is it a pipe dream and just go to the China route? What are your thoughts?
I think it's a bit of a pipe dream to that. So whenever we work with enterprise level businesses, it's not necessarily just a business that says, I want to produce in China because it's cheaper and I like something that's cheaper. It's always because it's in the best interest of their shareholders, and they have to do whatever's in the best interest of their shareholders. So they will find a cheaper alternative, and whether that's producing in the US, in India, in China tends to be the best option. But I think what we're going to start to see, particularly with the Belt and Road Initiative in the next probably 10 to 15 years, is the rise of this China plus one. And who that plus one is, I'm not sure. It could be India, it could be Bangladesh, it could be one of the countries that China is investing in, could be Vietnam, could be Central America. Mexico might be on the rise for certain items. I know Brazil has seen a huge spike in manufacturing. Ultimately, in the next decade, I think it will be China plus one. It's not just going to be China. And that's sort of the direction that Noviland itself is heading in. We're not going to be solely reliant on one country because of the geopolitical impacts that any administration could have. Being a one-trick pony is never fun. But who that plus one is, I couldn't tell you. Everyone has their strengths and weaknesses. It's going to depend on the infrastructure of that country. You go to India, you can get low MOQs on textiles, very high quality textiles. You get trinkets. You can get. They're really good at metallurgy over there because they have a lot of the tooling. A lot of the labor force is cheaper. So we are going to start to see costs rise. We just saw the devaluation of the Chinese RMB, which has impacted a ton of companies. And it's not just a factory wanting to charge you more. It's something that's completely out of their control. The government said, hey, we're going to devalue this by, I think it's at 9% now. You're going to have to, either eat that cost or your customer's going to have to eat that cost. 99% of the time, customer's going to eat that cost. So it's really just being able to be nimble, move with the market, and we'll see where that +1 really comes up. I don't think it's always going to be China, just China. I think China, for the long run, is going to be that main sort of source where a lot of companies can turn to for their products.
Okay. Before we jump into the fire round, David, do you have any follow-up questions?
No, this has been very, very helpful. And Francois, you've done a great job answering all of our questions. I think that currently I've got my blue belt in product sourcing, and I want to work with somebody that has their black belt. And I think that's Noviland. So really looking forward to testing out your platform. And Ken, we're gonna have to do a follow-up episode, just to talk about our experiences with it. But yeah, really appreciate you being on the show. So Ken, we'll kick it over to you for the fire round.
Yeah, absolutely. So Francois, all of our guests, we put them through the ringer on a fire round. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
All right. What is your favorite book?
At the moment, I would say Blitzscaling by Reid Hoffman, and he has a co-author with it. Reid Hoffman, Blitzscaling, number one book. Every entrepreneur should read it.
I'm writing it down, put it on my list. What are your hobbies?
I'm at the office about 12 to 16 hours a day, to be honest, to be completely honest. Wow. My hobby, honestly, is and this is what our founders and my bosses have really empowered me to do, is come up with just business ideas that we can sort of shoot the shit on. That's one of my hobbies. I kid you not, and Lisa can attest to this. I have an entire notepad of just business ideas. So that's one of my hobbies. My other hobbies is definitely a little bit more, I don't know if you could say immature, but gaming. I love playing Call of Duty, hopping on with some friends, and we could stay socially distant that way, but gaming and just coming up with just any idea possible and writing it down, I would say are my two biggest hobbies.
Nice. So you're 90 miles an hour at work and then going home and getting on and blasting some things up, huh?
Exactly.
All right. So last one, what do you think sets apart successful entrepreneurs from those who give up, fail, or never get started?
And this goes back to, I think, what I talked about earlier, grit. Grit is the number one component that I think I see for entrepreneurs that are successful. And that's either lack of grit or having too much grit, where they think they can do absolutely everything, and that's not scalable. But also knowing your limits and knowing that you have to put in those 80-hour weeks if you want to run something successful. It is not 15 years ago where this could just be a side gig and you could become a multimillionaire. You have to learn about everything, and I'm sure you both can attest to that. Yeah,
that's excellent advice. And I haven't heard that in a while. The grit, knowing you have to have enough, but not too much, right? So you have to know when to tap out and when to pivot. Otherwise, right, you're just kind of doing the same thing, expecting different results. So excellent.
Now, Francois, how can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, they can add me on LinkedIn. There aren't too many Francois Jaffres, or you would spell it Jaffres, out there. So you can find me on LinkedIn. You can also find us on Facebook, just facebook.com/Noviland Inc. We get tons of messages there all the time, no matter what it's about. And lastly, it's if you want a guaranteed phone call with me every single time, just sign up for our platform, noviland.com. And as soon as you sign up, you get an email, try to get an onboarding call on. It can be anywhere from a quick 5-minute conversation to I've spent over 2 hours with new users before. So any one of those ways is perfectly fine.
Very nice. And we will post links to all of those in the show notes. Really want to thank you for being a guest on the Firing the Man podcast, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, guys.